This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome to the latest Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm your host, Joe Rimmer. I'm joined by Paul Gorst and Keifer MacDonald to talk all things Liverpool today and mostly transfers. Lads, how are we? Gorst, are you okay?
Yeah, all good. Just saying, wasn't I off air that we're in the middle of the dead zone now, with not a lot's happening, and we're still trying to see what Liverpool are doing transfer-wise. We were told it was going to be a busy June. It started busy enough. Now we'll see if the rest of the month follows suit. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks when it normally probably wouldn't be.
Yeah, Keifer, how are you? You keeping yourself busy?
Yeah, absolutely. Hoping a few more signings can follow through. Obviously, you got Mac Allister done last week, and as Gorsty said, it's a bit of a weird period because you kind of have that, not the hangover from the season, but you kind of dissecting, in the first couple of weeks, and then you're also kind of keeping an eye on pre-season and the plans that are all going to, come to fruition, hopefully. So, you're just kind of waiting for them and to kind of kick into place.
Yeah, June's that month, isn't it, where you feel like you've still got 1 foot in last season and 1 foot in next season, and you don't. Is it last season or is it still this season?
The season technically only finished Saturday, didn't it, with the Champions League final? And then you see almost immediately pictures on the England official Twitter account with, Trent shows up and Harry Kane and whatever else. So it never stops, does it, really? Football now, it's a 12-month cycle.
Well, it doesn't stop, Gorsty, and it certainly doesn't stop for Liverpool, who, like you say, had to start things quickly, didn't they, in the transfer market? They've done that with Alexis Mac Allister, but they continue their midfield search, and then it seems the next two names that we're constantly seeing linked with Liverpool are Kephren Thuram, son of Lilian Thuram, and Manu Kone of Nice and Gladbach, respectively. They sort of make sense, don't they, in terms of the profile of player Liverpool might try and sign next?
Yeah, I think so. I think Mac Allister is obviously the experienced Premier League proven midfielder, isn't he? 24 years of age, around about 200 professional appearances, World Cup winner, of course, and then maybe Liverpool are looking to fall back on a slightly less experienced, more youthful profile. Kephren Thuram and Manu Kone, 22 and 21 respectively, I think. Ryan Gravenberch is another one who we know that admirers of. He's 21, 22. So it does seem to be a little bit of a broad profile that's getting painted at the moment. Liverpool looking to bring in players who may be a little bit, further behind in their overall football journey, if you like. But I'm a little bit concerned that if that is to be the way Liverpool are looking at it, I think there's room to manoeuvre with young players coming in, but Liverpool need instant results, don't they, from whoever they sign this summer. I think they're pretty much guaranteed that from Mac Allister, given his pedigree. But then you're asking a lot of a Thuram and or a Kone to come in and instantly be as good as they have been for Mönchengladbach or Nice, and show the kind of form that's made Thuram in particular a France international. So while I can see why they're looking at players of this profile, and Gravenberch, kind of is included in that, I'd be a little bit wary of maybe still looking for an experienced player around about 23, 24, 25, the kind of ballpark figure that Liverpool tend to go to for a first team arrival.
Yeah, is it a case, Gorsty, of just making your money stretch at the moment? They've got Mac Allister by the sounds of things, a very good deal, 35, potentially a little bit more, certainly with agent fees, that sort of thing, million. But then if you get a Thuram or a Kone for around the same price, that's two midfielders boxed off for not even the price of an Enzo Fernandez. Is that why we're seeing them linked with these types of players? Is it just one where they make sense?
Yeah, possibly. I think if you look at Liverpool's midfield options now, there's too many who are at a certain part of their careers and not enough in the middle part. Thiago's 32, is he? Jordan Henderson will be 33 this month. And then you've got Harvey Elliott, Stefan Bajcetic, Curtis Jones, who are all, 18, 20, 21, 22. So I think personally they need another one who is about to approach his prime years. But I can see why they are looking at profiles like Thuram and Kone and Gravenberch. But the interesting thing is the wages that they've saved from
Yeah.
Firmino, Oxlade-Chamberlain, Keita, Milner. That's somewhere in the region of $500,000 a week.
Yeah.
What's Mac Allister going to be on? I don't think he's not going to be. Well, he's not earning what Salah's earning, is he? I don't. Possibly a little bit further down that wage scale. So there is theoretically at least money there for big wages.
Yeah, I mean, Gorsty there mentions the age range of the team. I look at the makeup of the team now, and you sort of look. You've got Fabinho, who will probably start the season. There's no one really like him in the Liverpool squad. Mac Allister, who probably is going to start the season as a starter. Is it then just about getting another midfielder or two other midfielders that sort of give you options, perhaps on the other side of the pitch with Henderson, Thiago, Basetic when he's back fit, potentially Elliott going in there, Jones? I mean, is it just about, again, not just how far you can stretch your money, but the makeup of those three?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, as Gorsty says there, the kind of the age profiles has been a big thing that's, been earmarked last season. But I also think, you look at the young players, Curtis Jones maybe in the last part of the season, but I think Harvey Elliott played, over 40 games. I think it was up until that Chelsea game he'd been involved in every single game. Yeah. And, as a young player, kind of earning your stripes in the Liverpool side, which, is probably up there with, certainly not last season, but, in the kind of grand scheme of Liverpool's history, certainly up there as one of the best ever.
Yeah.
I think the best way to kind of do that and compete in all fronts is to be, to have sustained spells in the side, but then also be afforded a break. And I think for too long last season, whilst I think it might have been, really good and, he would have loved to play himself, I think that maybe stifled him towards the back end of the season, that he played so much football and far more than anyone would have predicted. And then if you go the other end, same with Milner. Obviously, I think people call out a few of his performances last season, but, you think he signed that 1 year deal and that was, it's kind of almost like a guardian figure to the likes of Elliott, Jones and Carvalho. And then you kind of got them, they're not in their peak years. So I think, as Gorsty said, that's a real issue for Liverpool to kind of address. And with Mac Allister, who's 24, they've kind of done that. I'd probably liken it to kind of Fabinho when he came in. And I know he took a bit of time to adapt in that first season, but then, from there on in those kind of 3 or 4 years after, he was, the linchpin of that side, wasn't he? One of, so many key figures. And I think, you only have to look at, and I don't want to make it about City, but, you look at the side on Saturday night and kind of the options that City have, in terms of youth and experience. And, they've won everything there is to win in kind of English and European, well, not European yet, but, English football. If you're looking at that Liverpool's benchmark to ultimately get back to, you are going to need players who, not learning on the job, but they've done the job, other clubs. And I think that's why the Mac Allister one is so important, that he's come first, because, it does show that there is that, not that Liverpool would have lost its pull over after one bad season, but the fact that you can say, this is what we're after, these kind of players, a World Cup winner. Because that isn't something Liverpool have done too often. I think prior to Mac Allister, I think Jota was the last Premier League signing kind of direct, which was 3 years ago, which says an awful lot in terms of where Liverpool are maybe doing their shopping, even when they have been at the top of English and European football. But maybe that kind of not less patient, more ruthless approach, but just kind of thinking of the here and now rather than 3 or 4 years down the line. City are a juggernaut at the moment, and if that's what Liverpool want to stop and kind of want to get back to, you've got to kind of think about the here and now rather than what's coming up in a few years' time.
Keifer made a good point there. Gorsty, I wrote down a single word: rotation. I mean, it just made me think. I mean, you'll remember during the Rafa Benitez era, he rotated all the time. I always remember he rotated for 99 games, didn't he? The Bordeaux game kept the team the same, almost just to annoy people. But I remember at the time it was like that, along with zonal marking, was like the only thing the pundits would discuss after a game. He rotates, he shouldn't rotate, he play the same team. But one thing that City do and have done really well, and obviously they've got the players to do it, is they constantly rotate. And like Keifer said, you have to now find a way of making rotation work for you, because you've got to keep people fresh. Liverpool, you could argue, did rotate last season, but for all the wrong reasons. This season, going into the new season, that's what they need to do, don't they? They need the options to be able to do it for the right reasons. Yeah,
I mean, Liverpool's rotation came from a manager just looking for the right blend more than anything, didn't it? I think certainly up front, Liverpool can rotate, safe in the knowledge that if they bring out a Cody Gakpo through the middle, they can put Jota in there, or Luis Diaz comes out and Darwin Núñez can go wide left, or whatever it may be. I think the only fixed position on that front three is Mo Salah playing on the right, not least because he's Liverpool's best player, but also there's no one really comfortable enough to fill that role when he drops out. But midfield-wise, the rotation last season was basically because Liverpool were struggling and they either had injuries or loss of form, and more often than not, it was the case of both. So, it's difficult because I think Liverpool, first and foremost, need to decide what's their best midfield and then rotate from a position of power, knowing that.
But they did that, didn't they, under Klopp? Probably the best years. You had Wijnaldum, Henderson, Fabinho. That was their first choice. But then they bring Milner in. Yeah. They might play Oxlade-Chamberlain certain games. Keita will come in.
The back end of we calling it last season.
I know. That's why I said June's confusing.
The back end of 21-22 when Liverpool were going for the quadruple, I think that was where the perfect rotation plans come into play. I think Klopp basically had everyone fit and he was leaving out more often than not 4 players from the squad. Usually Joe Gomez, usually Curtis Jones, maybe a couple of others, Oxlade-Chamberlain. But he had everyone fit, didn't he? So he could do that rotation. Whereas last season it was rotating because of injuries and because you've just been beat 3-0 at Wolves or just been beat 3-1 at Brentford, whatever it may be. But I think to begin with, Liverpool need to figure out what is the best midfield for next season, and then you can look to rotate once everyone's got a bit more stable footing. Yeah,
I mean, the other thing about these signings, Keith, that I can't get out of my head is that, let's say they sign Thuram next. So they sign Mac Allister, Thuram, then they're going to have to sign someone English, aren't they, at some point, or certainly homegrown, I should say. So that might explain, and we'll talk about centre-backs in a bit, but might explain Levi Colwill. And then, but it might mean that if they sign a third midfielder, he's English. Now, we've seen links with Conor Gallagher. We know that he was someone they were looking at. Obviously, Mason Mount, I think, would have ticked that box, and if they could have got him, I'm pretty sure they would have done. Do you think that once perhaps, let's say, if Thuram is done or Kone is done, do you think that we'll see those names revisited?
I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I think for so long of 2023, I think a lot of people would have expected, certainly in the early parts, Mason Mount to probably become a Liverpool player at some stage. I know I certainly did. And obviously now that he looks like he's going to United, and obviously his chances of now coming to Liverpool appear pretty slim. Yeah. It's difficult to kind of assess it because, Liverpool aren't going to go out and pay over the odds for someone like Conor Gallagher for 40-50 million because, Liverpool, maybe half a mellow, but, during Klopp's tenure, they don't panic buy. They're kind of happy to wait. And obviously I know the kind of English quota is a bit different in that sense of it puts extra pressure on, a smaller squad. And we know with the Europa League next season in terms of Thursdays, Sundays and that kind of ruthless schedule, and if anything, it's going to be amplified more, if we have a smaller squad than they would say if they were playing in the Champions League. But it is difficult, and I suppose you say there with Levi Colwill, they could maybe explore that. They can explore that, not getting Mason Mount in kind of another sense, whether that be if they were to get a right back or a left-sided centre half, or there is a way they can kind of make that English quota up. But I think obviously Brighton was at 30 million they bid for Colwill last week or something, and that appears like that obviously was rejected, and Chelsea obviously holding out for either a lot more money or they're not going to sell. So that kind of tells you the kind of money Chelsea will be looking at for someone who we're talking about magic kind of figures in terms of Gorst says that 200 appearances in top flight football or in a professional career. I think he was at Huddersfield the season before last, and he got to the playoff final, and then he played at Brighton this year, so he's probably looking at 60-70 appearances. So it's not like in the grand scheme of things, it's not a huge kind of sample size to kind of judge someone off to go and spend 40, 50, 60 million. So whilst you would love Liverpool to go and grasp an English player from somewhere, I just think the nature of the market these days, you've got to do it really astutely, and going out and spending 60, 70 million, whatever Chelsea demand for Mason Mount, we can get Mac Allister for 30, 40, for 50 million, whatever it ends up being, is it's not something Liverpool are going to go down. But as I say, there's ways you can explore that and maybe get around that.
Yeah. What? Go on, sorry, Chris.
No, I was just going to say that kind of backs up your point you made earlier, Keith, where you were saying Liverpool haven't really utilised the English market in recent years because you're paying a premium based on the fact that they play in England. Levi Colwill only played 16 times for Brighton last season, and Chelsea rejecting 30 million for him. And don't get me wrong, he's obviously a young player with massive potential, and Liverpool are looking for that kind of left-sided centre-back, not necessarily going to take up the lion's share of the budget, and someone with years and years to grow. Almost a bit of a Joe Gomez signing, if you like. But there are a lot of hoops to jump through for that signing because he's a Chelsea player. Brighton are desperately trying to make him their player, and I just think there might be too many roadblocks in the way for Liverpool with that particular deal. But certainly, as a rough profile, I think he's the sort of defender who Liverpool are going to be looking at this summer.
What I find is interesting about the transfer window, and I think fans always forget this, when you go into it, they think Liverpool need X, Y, and Z, so just go out and buy them. But there are a lot of moving parts, aren't they? You look at Mount now, and like you, Keifer, I sort of thought 2/3 of the way through last season, the rumblings were Mount would probably end up at Liverpool. But Man United still haven't got that deal over the line. They seem to have agreed personal terms with Mount, but can't agree a fee with Chelsea. In the meantime, Liverpool have gone and swept in and bought Mac Allister. Chelsea might suddenly decide they'll take less for Colwell if they get what they want for Mount. Same with Conor Gallagher. I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool revisit Gallagher.
But they've got a deadline, haven't they, Chelsea?
Chelsea got to sell players before the end of this month.
So I think they insist that they don't, but I think they do.
Especially players like Mount who represent pure profits. Come through the academy.
You might start seeing things move, is what my point in terms of Mount. If they get the 60 million they want, or 70 million for Mount, they might go, you know what, we'd accept 20 for Gallagher or 20 for Colwell. But if they don't get what they want for Mount, you might start seeing that to try and make that up. And that's what I think. People just think it's about the buying club when it's as much about the selling club, and it's almost like a housing market, isn't it? Once one deal is done, then other deals start dropping into place.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to what we've been hearing for months, really, in terms of Liverpool spinning plates and seeing what's out there and what can be assessed. Because let's face it, they're not operating from a position of power that they have in recent years, where they're coming into a summer with a settled squad, a squad that's just won X amount, and the pool of players capable of improving the team is quite shallow. Let's face it, Liverpool, that well has deepened, hasn't it, because of the performances, because of the drop-off, because of the players leaving. So I think that's why it's an interesting summer for Liverpool, just because you can't just discount any links you see now. A little bit of a trained eye in the past, you could think probably not through that one. We'll do our due diligence and check it out and whatever else. But now you see Liverpool linked to players, and you think could be something in that. We'll have to get to work and see what's what. But that's why I think it's from a supporter's point of view, it's probably most exciting window it's been for a few years.
I think also, sorry, just to go on Ghostie's point there, I think Liverpool, maybe in previous summers where they could have maybe bided their time and waited a bit and thought, we'll camp it out and kind of see if Chelsea's stance change. I just think there's, we hear a lot about kind of last season and how the pre-season unfolded and how Klopp wasn't happy with it. I think there's a real emphasis on Liverpool to kind of be, they have to be swift with their business this year, because they have to, not that they're all going to be there for the 8th of July, I think the date is, because, say if they were to get a Thuram, I think he's involved with the 21's Euro, so he'd probably be there a bit later anyway. But I just think, in terms of doing, if you look at 2017, Oxlade-Chamberlain coming in at the end of August, I don't think Liverpool, unless something truly remarkable kind of presented itself so late in the window, I'd be surprised if Liverpool, just as kind of supporter looking in, I'd be surprised if we were doing any business in August, because, as Gorst said, it's probably the most important window in 6-7 years. And it's one where Liverpool, if they went into the next season with the same squad, where in previous years, well, you'd back the squad to go again, it's clearly not the case for next season. There were so many flaws last year that, it's not a case of where they can go, we didn't get Van Dijk in the summer, we can wait until January. It's like, right, we have to look at option B, C, D, E, F, G, until they get someone who's obviously an upgrade on kind of what they had.
I think, personally, just that any business they might be doing in August will be trying to get like a homegrown player across the line. It's interesting you say about pre-season. I always think it's funny with pre-season. Klopp not happy with last year, but it's always like when a boxer is going into a fight and they say it's the best camp I've ever had, and then they lose and say actually it was full of problems. I was injured. I was ill. Like your trainer didn't turn up or whatever it was. So I mean, it'd be interesting. Everything should fall into place this summer in terms of pre-season. They're going on one trip. It's not for too long. They got the training camp. There's not too many internationals. They've got the right players coming back. Yeah, there shouldn't be, in theory, those disruptions.
Well, I think there's an argument to be made that Klopp has put his foot down a little bit this summer. I don't think he does that as much as he probably should. he'd certainly get away with it. But I think for this summer, he's thought, well, I'm not having what happened last summer. And, we're hell-bent on getting back to where we were and showing these teams that we're not a busted flush and whatever else. And I think the fact that they have rejigged things around has very much been on the manager's say-so, which doesn't always happen really, but I just think maybe sometimes Klopp doesn't realise how important he is.
Yeah.
And they kind of first mentioned, in the early weeks of the season, he kind of didn't give that away, but I think prior to the World Cup, he'd said it that the pre-season and kind of the way they did the trip to Asia wasn't planned. So whether Liverpool would come first, second, third, or fourth, that had been put out there before. It wasn't like he's come out now and said, "Well, we finished fifth."
Yeah.
That was a huge mistake. He kind of put his cards on the table kind of long beforehand.
Perhaps so. The other thing about this summer that that will make it different to many of the others is Jorg Smacker coming in. He's officially taken over now from Julian Ward. I'm sure Liverpool will have been working on many deals in the background that he will then help facilitate, but he will also bring new contacts, of course, new ideas. So we might start seeing new names and different deals coming into play, might we?
Yeah, I think we've already seen that, haven't we, with the Mickey van der Ven links before it even started. Someone was telling me recently that it's gone into silly season very early for Liverpool, with George Smacker behind the scenes. He was 12 hours into the job and Liverpool were being linked with player XP, player 1, 2 and 3. And
it reminds me of when Klopp took over and we in his era,
Royce.
But of course, one or two of them were true, weren't they? Because with Goethe, for example, he did genuinely try and go out and buy him. So they will use contacts that they have. They have to, don't they?
Yeah, this whole George Smacker appointment is just so intriguing for me because they've coaxed him out of retirement. 59 years old, biggest job of his career, only a short-term deal. He's either the one that they absolutely wanted above anyone else, or he was bottom of the list because they've had to get him out of retirement. Can't really be in between. I just can't see it.
Yeah.
Apparently recommended by Klopp's agent, wasn't he, Mark Kosici? Because I can never say his name. Yeah, Klopp's agent anyway. But he's got a little bit of a reputation as a no-nonsense, gets the job done. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it works out. Obviously, the deal for Mac Allister was well underway before Smacker showed up, and we were told, weren't we, that the signing of Mac Allister was almost a kind of formal handover, and now everything else is Smacker based. So I can see why Liverpool are going to be linked to players from the Bundesliga because that's obviously his area of speciality. Yeah.
One position that we know they're looking at as well, Keifer, is left centre back. We'll come on to other areas of defence, but just initially, it does make sense when you think about it. But I suppose it wasn't the position I thought that they would be looking straight after this summer.
No, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously you've got Van Dijk there now, who for essentially all his Liverpool career has been immune to criticism, indispensable, and obviously we maybe saw that last season. He had a bit of a drop, and I'm sure he would have been the first person to admit that his standards weren't as as the rest of the Liverpool teams weren't up to kind of his previous years. But I still think he's Liverpool's best defender, and I don't think that's changed overnight. You don't become a bad player overnight, and I think had, and not to shift blame in any fact, but I don't think it's surprising that the midfield, Fabinho, and kind of how his legs kind of deteriorated so quickly, and it's no surprise that the defenders playing behind him are facing more shots, more attacks on them, and so on and so forth. So I think in that sense, it I suppose obviously the long-term planning obviously makes sense, but when you look at Van Dijk, he's one of those players you wouldn't think at the age of 34, 33, like a Ferdinand who's going to be off to, a QPR or something like that. You do feel that it's a different generation. Yeah. He probably can play for, probably another 4 or 5 years. Whether that's all at Liverpool, we'll see. But I maybe thought they might go for a right-sided centre-half because obviously that's the kind of the new tactic. Obviously, we know Konate's there, but his kind of injury record, it kind of puts that whole tactic into doubt because, if you have to put Joe Gomez in there or you have to put Joel Matip in there, would that plan be executed as efficiently or as, as likewise as it has been doing, and you probably say no just because Konate's skill set, he does feel like he's 1 in a million in terms of his reading of the game, his athleticism, his aggression.
You have to be dominant there.
Yeah, you have to.
And whilst I think Matip and Gomez have been good partners at various times for Van Dijk, it feels like if they're going to shift you right back into midfield, you need that player that comes in to be a presence. And Konate isn't he?
And I think as well, the thing I've always thought with Matip and Gomez, I'm not sure statistically, but how many times they've played together, but I always felt they were never leaders in their partnerships. Obviously, Gomez.
They need the another
one. Yeah, I mean, Gomez and Van Dijk, 19, 20, how good they were in that kind of league title running, and even before, in 2018-19, before Gomez did his leg at Burnley, they were both brilliant, weren't they? And then Matip comes on, and they win the Champions League in the second half of that season. But to kind of be in that position where you are going to be pulling Trent in and out and telling him to go and kind of dominating two positions, commanding those spaces, I just think you've got to be vocal, you've got to be a lead, you've got to be an animal, and that's what Konate is. I just don't think, Gomez is, as much as I think he has been so unlucky with injuries, and I still think there's a really talented player in there with, I say the word potentially, he is 25 now, but obviously he got a new contract last year. The club still do believe in him, and if we're talking about homegrown and players who play multiple positions, he absolutely ticks the boxes. He's not someone I'd be looking to kind of get rid of or anything like that. But I just maybe thought there might be someone who would come in as a right-sided centre-half with maybe a similar profile to Konate, where in Konate's first season, where he didn't play an awful lot in the Premier League, did he? He was more kind of the Champions League defender, and then he kind of got towards the end of that quadruple chase, he kind of got pushed in. I thought that's maybe what they might try and do this summer on the right hand side, but if the left hand side talk is kind of all true, then obviously it must be looking for when Van Dijk's best days are probably behind him.
I think it hints at maybe a bit of a formation change as well. Obviously we saw Andy Robertson there, didn't we, for the last 2 months of the season. I mean, still officially a back four, but obviously seeing the areas Trent's picking up the ball, it's gone to a three. Is there an argument that the left-sided centre-back comes in, Robertson comes out the team for a bit, and then Liverpool play with the back three of Konate, Van Dijk in the middle, and then whoever this left-sided centre-back is?
It's interesting. So you buy a centre-half that can kind of bit of a full-back centre, which Colwell is, isn't it? Full-back centre-half on the left-hand side that shuffles across when you push Trent up. Yeah,
and it kind of goes back to the Joe Gomez likeness as well, in terms of, obviously you can play on the right, can't he, and then right centre. Someone who plays left centre of that age, someone who's not going to completely break the bank, but someone who's going to be a long-term addition project. Maybe not playing every week, but certainly coming in alongside more experienced campaigners like Van Dijk and Konate and going from there.
I mean, the other thing it suggests, Gorsty, that something we've criticised Liverpool for in the last couple of windows is that they are very early, perhaps, but starting to succession plan for Van Dijk, which is arguably, I mean, perhaps other than goalkeeper, they're lucky to have a very good second choice goalkeeper by those things. But in terms of the rest of the team, might be the hardest position that they're eventually going to have to replace, isn't it, Van Dijk?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you're going about replacing Virgil van Dijk. He's at his best, he was the best defender in the world, wasn't he? How many times Liverpool had the best player in the world in their position, for only one over the years? Probably not very often, is it? He was undoubtedly the best centre-back in the world, and I still think he can get back to those levels as well. So it's going to be the hardest job, replacing him eventually, but I suppose if you're looking at it a bit proactively, you can get someone in who's younger and who's got years on his side to pick up everything that Van Dijk can pass on to him, and then in X number of years' time, he can try and fill the void.
It goes back to kind of the thing I said at the top about Elliott in terms of, if you bring someone in who's 19, 20, you can mould them now and you can, give them 5 and 10 games here. But, if you bring in someone in, who's 19, when Van Dijk's, done and maybe moved on, and you're saying, right, go play 45 games a season, it's like, well, how do you even begin to learn and develop and, become a better player?
The reason he's still the most expensive player, isn't it?
Yeah.
5 years on.
In terms of right back, Keifer, you've got different names written down on your pad there. I mean, first of all, it suggests that, Klopp said for a long time that he thought Trent was the best fullback in the world. I think if they're not going out and buying a right back, it sort of suggests that that's what Klopp still thinks and hasn't changed his mind. But and the other thing I think to remember about Trent is touch wood. Don't think this is wood, but
Such PDF.
yeah, there's that Trent is very, very rarely injured, isn't he? So I suppose Liverpool might look at it and think, well, is there any point in spending big on a right back? I mean, they just sold Nico Williams last summer because he barely ever played. Perhaps in Liverpool's minds, no point spending a lot of money in a position that they won't play. And they did buy Calvin Ramsey last summer. So where do you think that will shape up? Will Ramsey go on loan? If he does, who do you think?
Links to Benjamin Pavard over the weekend, by the way.
Yeah. But that, I find it hard to believe. I mean, I know he's a good player.
He's 27, which is a red flag for me immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And a red flag also is, Bayern Munich, a team trying to get back to the top, and if they're happy to kind of part with someone like that, you always ask questions when But in terms of Trent and kind of the wider discussion, I mean, obviously we know what the story of his season was, and I think a lot of people maybe initially thought Liverpool would go out and buy a fullback, a right back. But my kind of thing was even, in those kind of early games, the Arsenal game, the Leeds game, and I think, I can't remember which game it was, but when Gary Neville kind of did like a big breakdown of it, and he said, don't. I think it was along the lines of it would almost be an insult to think that Trent is good enough to go into midfield, and all these players who have been there for 10, 15 years. Yeah. And while obviously Trent was a centre midfielder in his youth days, I'm one of them. I think if he did move into midfield, it would make his job a lot harder. Yeah. I think at the minute he's almost like, I mean, how I would look at it as like an opposition manager or whatnot, players like, where do you even begin to mark him? How do you pass him on? When he's kind of running into those channels and coming into the pitch, that's when he's at his most dangerous. But if he's receiving the ball, he's back to goal and he's got to pop it off, and he's got two defenders on his toes. It's like, is he going to be as effective? But he's got that athleticism to run up and down the channel if needs to be. He can do the overlaps with Salah. I mean, if you think of his kind of Liverpool career over the last 4 or 5 years, he's literally done 3 different generations of the fullback role. He's done the kind of more, when he first kind of came into the team. I remember his debut at Old Trafford, and he was like very defensively minded, and people probably don't remember that. And then I think a year later in the Champions League at Anfield, when Sane came, he was that Centurion season, he was unbelievable in both of those legs. And then obviously you saw him develop into more of a playmaker and obviously a phenomenal player for Liverpool. And then during that time he was obviously more overlapping with Salah. Then last season, as in 21-22, he started coming more infield, and now he's kind of gone into this John Stones kind of esque role. And I just think, if you were to kind of lose that freedom with him, I just think it would take an awful lot out of kind of his game, because he has got that free reign to do anything. And, you see it so many times as, when I know it's on a different side of the pitch, once Thiago picks up the ball and he's got, little options or little space to run at, and he has to go back. And I just don't think that's Trent's game. While he's brilliant at passing and doing all that, running onto the ball and, in those kind of Beckham-esque areas of crossing in those kind of half spaces, he's, probably only De Bruyne is better at him in world football. So, whilst people would have probably expected a right back, I'm quite happy with the options Liverpool have got. Obviously, Ramsey didn't have his best season. I think he only played two games or so, but
growing pains, wasn't it? Really, in
I mean, you look at Tsimikas in terms of when he came in last year, and obviously as Liverpool were on the verge of the quadruple, everyone was like, this is brilliant, Liverpool got him, and almost like for like. But in his first season, I think he played that League Cup game against Arsenal, was his only start. Didn't start. I think Robertson did all 38 Premier League games, and then the next season he kicked on. There's no reason. Yes, Ramsey might go on loan, but there's no reason why you can't, go on and become, a second choice fullback.
So Liverpool only, in theory, need someone for, I don't know, Europa League,
15 games a season,
League Cup, and then FA Cup certainly, and I mean early rounds in pretty much all of them. They don't need, and then a handful of Premier League games at most, don't they?
Yeah, just going back to the point on Trent, I think Liverpool fans have got to ask themselves what do they want of this player.
Yeah.
So he's playing 2 positions at the moment. You can't have him doing both to an extraordinary world class standard. So when Liverpool do concede a chance or a goal from that right side, there's got to be a little bit of a tempered criticism about it, because you can't, what do you want him to be doing? Do you want him to be a steady Eddie, a fullback who throws in aggressive tackles, concedes throw-ins, concedes corners, gets the ball up the pitch and away from danger? Or do you want this all-encompassing creative fulcrum who's going to be getting 15, 20 assists a season and be one of the best players in Europe. I think Liverpool fans have probably got to have a conversation with themselves as to what they want from this player for what coming up now. Theoretically the best years of his career, because he's still only 24, isn't he?
I mean, there's been a lot of hot takes on Trent last season, and I think we're all guilty of it. Fans, pundits, media, everyone. We talk a lot about his position, but I think first of all, you're right. People forget what fullbacks are. I mean, this idea that fullbacks don't have the ball taken past them is it's the most ridiculous notion I've ever heard. You watch Trent is an elite player, and you watch some of the players in the Premier League. I'm watching Leicester, Everton, and I know you could argue they're very poor teams in terms of the Premier League, and they were. One of them went down, the other one almost went down. But you watch them, and the fullbacks, honestly, I think Everton had Patterson playing for them at that point. And considering they paid 15 million for him, he came in as a bright young fullback. He had the ball taken past him almost every time Leicester went in the attack. And this idea that the Trent should be just defensively really solid, really great going forward, I just think people need to sort of temper their expectations.
It's such an English thing though, because he is this, he's just a freak of a player, a freak of nature in terms of, no one's ever done what he's done. You can talk about maybe John Stones maybe moving into that role first, but in terms of fullback, there's never been another one like him. So it's like, where do we bring him down? Where do we bring him down to reality? And that's the thing of we start to nitpick, and it's also a social media age of where everything you do gets clipped and amplified, and that's. And I think that kind of discourse is external to kind of what Liverpool fans think. I think if you ask...
I think also as well, a lot of team spec players now are wide forwards. So the fullbacks happen to come up against, the best players on the opposition team every week.
And as Gorsey just said then, the lads playing two positions. If any managers, earning their book, they're going to say, this lad's going to be, 5 or 10 yards further forward than the other left back. You're going to have a 5-yard head start on him. Let's go down the right hand or their left channel. Which
I think the other points for me is one, Liverpool weren't very good last season, and Trent was just a part of that, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if Liverpool get the right people in midfield and start moving back to where they were, whether the Trent experiment kind of comes to a quiet end because he just becomes, they just carry on going where they were before. We had all these issues, the season before last, we weren't talking about whether Trent should play in a different position or whether he was good enough. Him and Robertson were very good. Like you just said, Tsimikas had a really good season, and that was because the rest of the team around him was working well. And I think if they get back, we'll see Trent get back. I think Trent's biggest problem at the moment is perhaps his body language, which I think at times last season let him down a bit. And I understood why. He's a young lad who was getting a lot of unfair criticism. I think Neville at times was pretty unfair on him. I think we should remember that Neville wasn't exactly. He was a brilliant fullback, but
functional, highly functional.
But he wasn't. He perhaps didn't reach. He wasn't as bad at Trent as Trent can be at times defensively, but he wasn't anywhere near as good as he could be.
Certainly would have been skinned by Sean Coates.
Yeah, exactly. It happened to everyone. I think Trent. His body language should improve, and I could understand at times, but I would like to see that improve next season. But yeah, I think if Liverpool improve, Trent gets.
I think also as well, as you say, Joe, I wouldn't be surprised as well. Certainly to the extent of as we saw in the last kind of 10 games of the season, because the one thing Liverpool were missing in midfield was legs.
Yeah.
And if you are getting, a Mac Allister who's a 24, if you're getting good lads at good ages in midfield who can run around and do lots of that heavy lifting. It all immediately takes the burden off Trent, and it kind of gives him that freedom again of where you're probably not noticing him as much because he's not overlapping a Jordan Henderson or a 32-year-old Thiago. Or
Henderson used to cover for him a lot, didn't he? A lot. So, all right, moving on from immediate Liverpool, so someone in the past Liverpool, Steven Gerrard is in the headlines today for being linked with a move to Saudi Arabia. It seems to be gathering momentum. In fact, I don't know what's happened while we're in this pod, but a few people were saying just before we went in, you see a few Twitter accounts saying that it was a pretty much done deal for him to go and manage over there. Gorsty, fair to say, seems a bit of a risk from Gerrard to go and restart his career.
Yeah, but I mean, if it does turn out to be true, and we've seen pictures of him supposedly in Saudi Arabia, obviously he was in Istanbul on Saturday. It'd be a real major shock, I think. I don't really see why. I can see why wouldn't necessarily agree with it, but I can see why Cristiano Ronaldo's gone there or Karim Benzema at the very end of their playing careers. But he's at the very beginning of his managerial career, hasn't he? And you're not going to build up any stock winning, drawing or losing in Saudi Arabia. Let's face it, no one cares. No one's bothered. It's not a major league. It's not in the top 10 major leagues. I just don't see why. I don't see the appeal, apart from maybe nipping over to Dubai when you're in Saudi Arabia on days off. For me, I just don't get it at all.
Yeah, I mean, Keifer, I felt a bit sorry for Gerrard last season. Obviously, I think he took a thankless job at Aston Villa, and I think that they are the sort of club, and we see this a lot in the Premier League, whose fans rightfully expect someone to come in and be very good. But first of all, I think what was always held against him is that for some weird reason, people seem to be so annoyed with Gerrard because he played for Liverpool and was loved by Liverpool. And you know, you see it, don't you? Every week fans come to Anfield and sing the Gerrard song, even though they had nothing to do with him and nothing to do with that title race or anything. So that seems to be one that I think Aston Villa fans, for some weird reason, you tell me, couldn't get over. And yeah, obviously it didn't go well there. But I mean, they loved Dean Smith, but it went pretty badly there with Dean Smith at the end. And Emery has done an excellent job in the second half of the season, but it tailed away at the end. And I honestly wouldn't be, you know, they probably clipped this, but honestly wouldn't be surprised if we sit here in a year's time and Emery's moved on and they're on to someone else, because that's what happens in the Premier League all the time. And if that doesn't happen, then he's obviously done a good job. But we see these clubs, managers come and go. I think with Gerrard, I think he should maybe look back. A real test of his mettle would have to go back to the Championship, perhaps, and take someone middling in the Championship and see whether he could get them up and do more back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I kind of saw those images floating around this morning, I think the one biggest thing was probably a bit disappointed in the sense of, if you might have other motivations to go there. I'm sure, but for starters, it feels like we haven't seen Steven Gerrard as a manager, because he obviously did the 18s Indy at Liverpool, did a year there, and then he went up to Rangers, and even there, that was one where, not to the same extent Gorst said, but there's people saying, well, if you win, lose or draw in Scotland, no one cares. But obviously to a far different extent to kind of what it will be in Saudi Arabia.
Just to intercept there, I think the Rangers job, by the way, is he did a better job than he gets credit for.
I was about to say, if you look at his record in Europe, took him to the quarters of the Europa League, didn't he? I think back-to-back seasons, and some decent players up there, and
won the league,
went unbeaten. I think
the Rangers hadn't won the league. Yeah, people forget that they
only conceded about 12 goals or something.
Yeah. And it seems to be that obviously when Gerrard kind of leaves Celtic and Rangers, the fans are almost pretty toxic and to forget immediately of what they've done because they view themselves as a bigger club than Aston Villa or Leicester. And obviously Gerrard was linked with Leicester, wasn't he, earlier this month? And I think that would, maybe obviously a Championship job, he may have not turned his nose off and maybe thought he was a bit better then, but I can understand why he would have had hesitations about going there, kind of seeing how
league.
And you look at the amount of teams in there next season, it's not a walk in the park, whereas, I was speaking to one of my mates the other day, Burnley fan, I texted him and said, like, it's amazing that you got out first time, because, if you'd gone down this year, you'd probably finish, 7th or 8th, and that would be viewed as a respectable season. But I do think with Leicester players, obviously like Maddison, Barnes probably going to go, and, Ian Nacho, and I know they've not got the greatest finances post-COVID, but it does feel like there's an opportunity to rebuild there and kind of, almost bring like a new era, because that Rodgers era of like, the FA Cup followed on from the Premier League, and they had a few near misses in the Champions League. That's firmly the line to be drawn under that now, and it feels like they need a new identity. They probably lost themselves a bit last season, and why didn't you go and do that? It just felt like even if he'd done that and failed, and hadn't gone to plan, or he had problems off the pitch with maybe kind of the finances that Rodgers kind of echoed at his time there, at least you're giving it a go, and then you can go, well, I'll go to Saudi Arabia. But the reality is, if Gerrard does 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years in Saudi Arabia, he's going to move back to England, and his stock's probably going to be worse. He could win every single game, and his stock will be the same at best. And that's the big thing. There's no progression there. And I think as a young manager who's taken ambition in going back to Liverpool, then leaving the comfort of Liverpool, I just think it's quite disappointing. But on the flip side of that, my only kind of reasoning to kind of make sense of a decision would be that this is someone who's lived in Liverpool mainly his whole life. He didn't get to experience that culture of playing for a Real Madrid or an Inter Milan or something like that, because he was so loyal to Liverpool, maybe he just looked at it and thought, you know what, the money's obviously going to be good. A different lifestyle.
Yeah,
fair enough.
That's it. I mean, maybe he's looked at some of the offers he's had. You talk about Leicester there, but I worry for Gerrard. With I think unfairly, especially when you look at Lampard getting to go back to Chelsea. Right, it's a bit of that was only a temporary thing, but he might look at it and think, I did really well with Rangers.
That's been forgotten.
Struggled with Aston Villa, but the Rangers bit has been completely forgotten. And a Leicester or Leeds, who were linked with him, perhaps didn't fancy that because of what they've seen at Villa. And maybe you're right. Going to a mid-table Championship club is just viewed as too difficult, and not. When you put the money and the finances involved in Saudi Arabia, and probably the ambition, they probably are selling it to him as
we're going to be the face of this league.
Yeah, we're going to be a big thing.
I think your career history only counts for you when the most recent job you've done was a good one as a manager. Because had Gerrard done a good job at Villa, you'd still be talking about that Rangers thing. Done an incredible job there. Now, because he didn't do so well at Villa, it's kind of just ignored.
We've seen with managers, haven't we, that they can have bad stints some places, and I think Emery's someone that has had bad stints but come back and done well in other places, and sometimes things don't quite fit, do they? It's not, you haven't got the right backroom staff or the right club. It doesn't, the right fan base, the right group of players. So
and to be fair to Gerrard, he was only 11 months at Villa, wasn't he? Obviously, it was the post kind of Grealish era. A lot of new signings, and he kind of felt like he maybe got caught in that midriff.
Diego Carlos getting that ACL injury in the first couple of weeks.
I always remember that one is that he called out Mings the week before, didn't he? And then Carlos got the injury, and then he had to bring back Mings. So it was quite awkward, and he is obviously a tough taskmaster from kind of how it comes across in terms of with his players and that, and maybe he just thought it's not for me, the line of it all. He's obviously got his punditry gigs as well, and he maybe thought I'd like something a bit more low key,
in which case
absolutely fair enough.
All power to him. As the Sopranos always say, you should never tell someone how to earn. So the other thing I think for Gerrard as well, I think he's at that stage of his career where he's still quite young in terms of his managerial career, and I think he went and got someone like Coutinho who he'd played with, and obviously had seen in Liverpool training, brilliant player, in terms of how he can play, but it hasn't suited Aston Villa, has it? And he had a couple of flashes.
Probably stuck a little too long, didn't he?
But and I think as he gets older as a manager, you can pull away from those sorts of things, can't you? So we'll see how it turns out for him, but we wish him luck wherever he goes. And that's a lot for us. We'll be back on Friday to hopefully talk maybe some more transfers, some more concrete transfers, and everything else that's happening in the world of Liverpool. See you then. Ta-ra.
You've been listening to the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.